A bill that would have Maine join a national popular voting compact to elect the president will become law without the governor's signature. Similar legislation has passed in 16 states so far. It would give a state's electors to the presidential candidate who wins the national popular vote, even if another candidate wins that state. The interstate compact does not go into effect until enough states join that total 270 electoral votes, enough to elect a president. It currently stands at 209, including Maine's 4 electoral votes. And allowing the measure to become law without her signature, Mills said she sees merit in arguments for and against the bill and would like to see the conversation continue at a national level.